Hello, everyone. If you could please be seated, we're just about to start. Welcome to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. We're really delighted to have you here today for the launch of the new report of the Triangle in ASEAN, Skilled to Care, Forced to Work, recognising the skills profile of migrant domestic workers in ASEAN amid forced labour and exploitation. Thank you to everybody who's joined us in person. Thank you to everybody who's joining us online. We've got a really exciting agenda today, and hopefully we'll all learn a bit more about the state of work for domestic workers in ASEAN. Just a little bit of housekeeping for those in the room with us today. There's tea and coffee for refreshments if you would like now. And the bathrooms are out towards the elevators where you came in and to the right. And the emergency exit in the case of an emergency is also that way. So yes, please everybody stay safe. Before we get started, it would be amiss of me to open this event without thanking our very generous donors of the Triangle in ASEAN project. That's the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the Global Affairs Canada. Thank you very much to the donors. Without your support, we would not be able to continue to do this work, to support domestic workers in the ASEAN region, and to fill in knowledge gaps in research and find out more about this topic. My name is Joanna. I'm going to be your MC for today. I'm part of the regional communications team at the International Labour Organization, and I'm thrilled to be here. All right, without further delay, please let me introduce Kun Panuda Bumpala, our Deputy Regional Director of the Regional Office of Asia and Pacific for the ILO, to open the session with her remarks.
Thank you so much, Joanna. Here's your phone so that it doesn't ring in front of me. Colleagues and friends, thank you so much for coming together in this room, but also those joining us online. Like Joanna, I also like to thank our donors for this important work, the Government of Australia and the Government of Canada for their very generous support over the years. I also would like to thank and pay tribute to domestic workers who have been part of this study. They have come forward to share insights into their life stories, which give our research team a very good report that you have in front of you, Skills to Care, Forced to Work. I'm sure we'll hear more about the substance of the report later today. Let me just spend some minutes with you sharing a little bit of the context of the subject of domestic workers. Around the globe, tens of millions of domestic workers are at work every day to look after our homes and families. The care they provide inside our home is not just vital. It forms the very foundation of our society's collective well-being, our health, our life, our families, and our economies. Yet, far too often, their work remains unrecognized, unappreciated, and unprotected. These persistent discriminations against a critical sector of our world of work motivated us at the ILO to investigate what we consider the sophisticated skills, the profiles of the skills of migrant domestic workers in the Asia-Pacific region. And also, it had led to the report that we are launching today. Unfortunately, alongside some very positive findings on the skills, we also found that migrant domestic workers are still experiencing forced labor at alarming rates. You'll hear more about these dimensions and the estimates when my colleague Rebecca presents the research shortly after this. But also, let me also mention that in the broad context that why we at the ILO focus on domestic work sector. This is significant because globally there are 75 million domestic workers in the world over the age of 15. Asia Pacific employs 38.3 million domestic workers, which is over half of the globe in total. So we have more than half of the world in total in this region. So the region remains the world's largest employer of domestic workers. While roughly 80% of domestic workers in the region are women, we also actually in this region, there are also men domestic workers, accounting for nearly half of the total number of men domestic workers across the world. The presence of men in the sector sometimes surprises people. However, when we think about the definition of domestic work, as per the ILO Domestic Workers Convention number 189, it is very clear. The convention defines as domestic work as work performed in or for a household or households. So this includes the cohort of men performing work for households, often as gardeners, as drivers, and security guards, but also a diverse group of workers that includes those providing personal care to children and the elderly, cooking, cleaning, and taking care of pets, or household management. It was this range of tasks within domestic work that we wanted to explore further and consider from a skills perspective. The results from this research demonstrates the diversity of migrant domestic workers, but also reveal a situation where despite the skills required and the essential nature of the work, major destinations for migrant domestic workers are still not providing even the most basic labor protections. For example, 84% of domestic workers in the region are in informal employment. In Asia and the Pacific, over 60% of domestic workers remain fully excluded from labor law, and 60% remain excluded from the right to weekly rest, which is so essential. Nearly 3/4 of domestic workers in the region have no limits on their normal working hours, and only 11% of them are entitled to minimum wage to the same extent as other workers. Only 11% have minimum wage, which is quite small. This lack of protection creates, in turn, an environment where migrant domestic workers are at increased risk of forced labor. Countries in the region have made numerous commitments to improve conditions in domestic work. Time and again, the lack of labor protection is raised as a key factor in instances of exploitation and human trafficking. We have the tools within the ILO to assist countries that want to make real changes for domestic workers. We have a dedicated Domestic Worker Convention number 189 that clearly establishes the international labor standards for domestic work. We also have a range of fundamental conventions that can protect this group of workers against human rights abuses. And most recently, the ILO adopted the Violence and Harassment Convention 2019, which is Convention number 190, that bolsters protection for all workers against these practices in the workplace, including for domestic workers. The ILO stands ready to assist all governments, workers, employers, and other stakeholders who seek to improve conditions in domestic work. So hopefully this study can refocus and reinvigorate our efforts so that this generation of domestic workers is the last to experience poor working conditions and social stigma. In conclusion, friends, social justice needs to be the keystone of all that we do. Allow me here to briefly mention the Global Coalition for Social Justice, which the ILO Director General is forging this week in discussion with world leaders, head of governments and head of states at the International Labour Conference. This coalition would aim to balance environmental, economic, and social while advocating policy coherence and investment in social protection and decent work. Because, frankly, there is no social justice without decent work for those who are at the foundation of a caring society. And in the Asia Pacific, that means there can be no social justice without decent work for domestic workers. Thank you again for coming together, and thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kim Pin, for your comments and for highlighting the important work of domestic workers and the current state of work for them. We're now going to hear a little bit more about the nitty-gritty parts of this report. It's in front of you if you haven't already noticed. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Rebecca Napier-Moore. She's a technical officer with the ASEAN and Triangle program, and she's going to summarise the research findings for us in the report. Rebecca, stage is yours.
Thank you, Joanna, and hi, everyone. I'm going to get some help from the FCCT here to flip the slides. So let's go to the next one. There has certainly been a massive effort in getting this report together, involving dozens of specialists, researchers, experts from the ILO, from Rapid Asia, a team who spearheaded the quantitative research, and Jenna Holliday, our main writer and qualitative researcher, from CSO and union allies of domestic workers, and most crucially, from domestic workers. Many thanks to the over 1,800 workers, employers, government, and CSOs interviewed. This is a well-informed study. So I want to start out giving you 3 takeaway points today, and then ask for a little in-house participation. So first, takeaway point, there is forced labor in domestic work. Second, working conditions need improvement. Third, domestic workers are medium-skilled workers. So, I would like to ask everyone in this room if you could raise your hand if you were surprised by any of these. Did any of these surprise you? You didn't know or expect them, or you expected all of them maybe? Great, 1, 2, okay. So let me give you some numbers and a little bit more information on each one. Over to the next slide. Just a quick run through who we interviewed and where. We did quantitative surveys with over 600 employers and 1,200 women migrant domestic workers. And the migrant domestic workers were interviewed in Malaysia. We interviewed Cambodians, Filipinas, and Indonesians. In Singapore, we interviewed Filipinas, Indonesians, and women from Myanmar. And in Thailand, we interviewed domestic workers from Laos and Myanmar. Then we also did qualitative, in-depth interviews, 38 of them, with a variety of actors. Okay, next slide. So again, the first key takeaway is that there is forced labor in domestic work. So next, we're going to look at what forced labor is and what it looks like in this sector. Next slide. Some of you might remember Venn diagrams from math class. This is a diagram where there's 2 categories, and where they overlap is the middle of the Venn diagram. And this is how we measure forced labor at the ILO. So forced labor is that intersecting point on these diagrams where an individual is in a situation at work that is both involuntary and also under a threat of menace of penalty. So involuntariness and a penalty or a threat. And when a person has both of those in their workplace, then that corresponds to the statistical definition of forced labor. So just to explain a little bit of what those categories are, the first on involuntariness includes situations where a person is working for no or very little wages, not being allowed to quit a job, not being paid overtime, very poor accommodation, having to work on-call hours without consent, having to stay in a job longer than agreed. So these are all circumstances that may give rise to involuntary work, is the technical terminology there. As you can see in the countries studied, the circles, the larger circles that depict that represent that a vast majority of domestic workers could answer that one of these things was true in their situation, an indication of involuntariness. 79% in Malaysia, 90% in Singapore, and 76% in Thailand. The second set of questions, which the smaller circles represent, is related to penalties or threats. These include threats of violence or actual violence, restrictions on movement, in other words, people being locked in a house, for instance, withholding wages, withholding identity documents or phones, constant surveillance, so a CCTV camera, for instance, and threats of dismissal or deportation. So the percentages of these were for Malaysia 41%, Singapore 7%, and Thailand 5%. Where a person answered both is the overlap and estimates our forced labor figure. So in Malaysia, the forced labor figure is 29%, in Singapore 7%, and Thailand 4%. Next, please. We also disaggregated this data by countries of origin, where people came from before starting to work in Malaysia, Singapore, or Thailand. And this chart breaks down the forced labor by country of origin. If you look at the red color for Malaysia, you'll see that not only is every nationality of migrant domestic worker indicated at above 25% in forced labor, but also that those from Cambodia have horrible odds. Over half reported conditions indicating forced labor, in part because of a history with migration bans into domestic work in Malaysia. Next slide, please. We also looked at risk factors for forced labor. And to understand this slide, we can see that in Malaysia, for instance, domestic workers were 2.2 times more likely to be in a situation of forced labor if they had an irregular work status. In Thailand, a major risk factor was if people had higher than average migration costs. So people were 3.4 times more likely to be in forced labor if they had high migration costs. In Singapore, people were 47.7 times more likely to be in forced labor if they had salary deductions. And I want to focus here on this last point, as the forced labor number from Malaysia and Cambodia took our attention on the last two slides. So moving here to this issue of salary deductions and that being a high risk factor, we also asked both employers and workers about salary deductions. And the employers in Singapore said that 95% of them paid recruitment fees and costs. This is great, and per international law, that employers should be paying recruitment fees and costs. However, of that 95% that said they did that, 90% said they told us that they pass costs on to the worker through deductions. When we asked them what some of these costs were, 40% said documentation costs, 35% said recruitment fees, 25% travel, 24% medical exam, 17% training, and 9% payment to authorities. So I also want to emphasize that Singaporean employers are prohibited by the Ministry of Manpower to ask the worker to pay for the security bond. And further, the Employment of Foreign Manpower Act says that the salary deductions are not allowed for the work pass, security bond, medical insurance and exams, training, or repatriation travel. Okay, next slide. So moving to takeaway number 2, we covered the first one on forced labor. Second one is that working conditions need improvement. So what working conditions are we talking about? There's a lot in the report, and I just want to focus now on 2 things, hours and pay. So first, next slide is on hours. If we look just at one way of measuring hours, taking the hours that people work per week, we asked if people are working over 48 hours per week. And the chart on the left suggests that the majority in all countries are. And just to mention and give you a kind of baseline, the labor laws in each of these countries set a maximum number of hours, but domestic workers are exempted. So in Malaysia, the labor law for other sectors sets the maximum at 48. In Singapore, at 44, and Thailand at 48. However, and the next slide will show you this data, that on average, domestic workers in the region are working between 65 and 81 hours per week, depending on country. Then here on the right side of the screen is some data on on-call or standby hours. And this is very relevant for domestic workers who are living in. So they live in the same house as their employer, and often are called to do work at hours that are not 9 to 5 because they're there. And the employer's there, and it's easy to ask somebody to just do a little extra. Or to make it a standard thing where, for instance, the domestic worker might sleep in the same room as the elderly person or child that they're caring for, and if the person they're caring for wakes up in the middle of the night, it's their job to also wake up in the middle of the night and be on call and work. So some of these figures are in Malaysia, 76% said they had to be on call. 39% of those said anytime. It can be in the night. In Singapore, 95% said yes, they have to be on call. However, fewer people in Singapore have to be on call in their sleeping hours. So that's good. And Thailand had the lowest level of people saying they had to be on call, 41%. Okay, next slide is on wages. And this chart is in US dollars, and it's in the report, and there's a lot of data on wages in the report. And I just want to give you one message about wages. And that is from the bottom row of this chart, which is adjusting for a 48-hour week. So if we adjust for the standard week that other workers have, then what we found is not one respondent of our study, 1,201 people, not one, received minimum wage if you adjust for that standard hour week. Or a proxy for it with the instance of Singapore, which I can explain later if anyone's interested. And this correlates, as Pin was saying earlier, with a previous ILO findings that only 11% of domestic workers in the Asia-Pacific region are even entitled to a minimum wage. Okay, next slide is moving to the third key point. The third takeaway is domestic workers are medium-skilled workers. So I want to start with this great quote from a representative from the Thai government who exactly pinned down what the problem is. And this representative said, "Most people call domestic workers servants, making domestic work perceived to be low and undignified, that no skills are needed, and that it adds no value to the economy. As a result, domestic workers are not treated as, quote, workers, and they are not treated well, receiving low wages." This exactly sums up the problem and why we wanted to survey what skills domestic workers have. So this was the first time in this region that a survey has been done to assess domestic workers' skills. We asked 1,201 people what they do every day, and then we mapped it against the ILO standards skills classification, which has set levels for an elementary occupation, for medium skill, and for high skilled work. Okay, next slide, please. So, we found domestic workers are regularly working at medium skill levels. 62% on average in the region are doing direct care work, which is medium skilled by default. Anyone taking care of children, anyone taking care of elderly is doing medium skill work. And it's important to note that in this region, care work for elderly, sick, disabled, and children is increasingly needed through the region because of changing demographics here. We also surveyed different, we surveyed on direct care work, and we also surveyed on cleaning and cooking tasks, finding that 99% of respondents said that they do medium skill cooking tasks. The significance of this is enormous, and I want to first let you know a little bit of detail in here, because you might have a lot of questions about this. So first, let me tell you what the elementary level looks like. It's simple and routine physical tasks, typically with assistance and not requiring basic literacy or numeracy. This is a kitchen helper or a garden laborer, not someone working independently, nor someone working a lot of, not someone requiring a lot of interpersonal skills, which domestic work absolutely does. Medium skill work typically involves operating electrical equipment, literacy and numeracy, and good interpersonal skills. For this sector, it means, for instance, managing children's behavior, planning and purchasing supplies, maintaining hygiene of an elderly person that you care for, administering medicine, transporting elderly persons, for instance, in a wheelchair to get somewhere, supervising another domestic worker. And you'd be surprised how many employers told us that they had more than one worker, which means there's probably a supervisory relationship in that household. The average that employers told us throughout the region, all three countries, of how many workers they employ was 2 per household. So, workers are skilled and empowered, but still not remunerated or protected in law. Why is that? Another quote from a Myanmar domestic worker and advocate here in Thailand that's in the report is, "People look down on you. Everyone likes to say for domestic work that you don't need anything, just 2 feet and 2 hands. Go to the house and start working." So this is a perception that we have to start changing, and we're hoping that this report does indeed start to change. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of a theoretical point, that in most societies, and most are patriarchal, women are assumed to have acquired domestic work skills during their gendered upbringing, even though these might not be perceived or socialized as skills. And this is significant because if people are perceived as being unskilled, it's a good justification for not giving them labor rights. So the lesser the worker is, the lesser protection they're perceived to need, which the ILO completely disagrees with. Second, the idea that a worker is unskilled is also central in employers justifying low wages. And finally, framing domestic work as a traditionally woman's task within a family context is also something that veers people away from the application of labor law. Okay, next slide. So, the 3 takeaways again: there is forced labor in domestic work, working conditions need improvement, and domestic workers are medium skill workers. Next slide. So what are domestic workers doing about this? And we're going to hear much more about this in the next segment of this event. But what they're doing about this is organizing. Despite various restrictions to forming trade unions, migrant domestic workers are getting together and talking to policymakers about what needs to change. You'll hear about campaigns for 1 day off from Malaysia and Singapore, and a campaign from Thailand for social security inclusion. And I want to just draw your attention to this photo here of an event earlier this year where domestic workers in Thailand spoke with lawmakers about why it would be good if they had full access to social security here, rather than the current state of exclusion. Okay, next slide, and I only have 2 more. Almost at the end. Can you flip this slide, please? Yeah. Okay, so partly due to the campaigning from domestic workers, there are some recent positive developments or good practices to highlight, and these are great, but unfortunately, they are a bit piecemeal. So they're each positive, but they aren't woven together as part of systemic and full inclusion in labor law, which covers almost all other sectors of work, as we'll see is needed on the next slide. So what do we have so far? What positive protections, what gains for domestic workers? In Malaysia, not so long ago, the law was changed. Oh, sorry, can you go back to the slide before? Yep. Okay, so in Malaysia, the law was recently changed to change the term domestic servants to domestic employees. And so that's great, but as you'll hear later, nothing else in the law was changed, much to the disappointment of domestic workers. Second, a huge win in Malaysia since 2021 is that domestic workers are now included in Social Security. We had a large event on this yesterday, in fact, with Liesel, who'll be speaking, and my colleague Maria and some others in Malaysia. They've all just flown here straight from that. And so the Social Security inclusion there is impressive and really should be something followed in other countries. Malaysia also has a national plan of action against forced labor and has signed the Forced Labor Protocol. Included in that national plan of action is commitment to consider a minimum wage order. So there's commitment to look at domestic workers' inclusion in minimum wage, and we are hoping that that is followed through soon. In Singapore, in January of this year, a new regulation was passed that gives domestic workers 1 day a month that cannot be compensated away. So at least they get 1 day off a month. And there's mandatory health insurance in Singapore. There's training for first-time employers and for arriving workers. And very recently, there's follow-ups to households in the first year of work. In Thailand, it is not a requirement that domestic workers live in, like it is in the other two countries, nor do employers have to pay a levy per worker they employ. And both of these things give a little bit more freedom to the workers in Thailand. There is a draft law, Ministerial Regulation 14, that if passed, as the last draft we have seen, would allow inclusion in minimum wage, hours, and maternity leave, among other labor protections, which would be great. Okay, finally, to the last slide on recommendations, please. So the report gives a lot of recommendations, but there are 4 that are overarching and really would make a catalyzing effect on this sector. First is ratification of ILO's Domestic Work Convention number 189, and ensuring domestic workers enjoy rights at least equal to those of other workers in law and in practice. Second is to ratify and implement the Forced Labor Convention, number 29, and its protocol, and ensure urgent action for the effective and sustained suppression of forced labor in domestic work. Third is to formalize skills recognition opportunities for domestic workers, which consider years of experience and transversal skills, which are skills that can apply to lots of sectors like language and communication. Fourth is ensuring regular migration pathways for domestic workers that appropriately recognize the skilled nature of the work in terms of employment conditions and do not tie workers to employers. I'm going to stop there. I hope the 3 points stick and we can have lots of question and answer later. But now let's move to the next segment. So I'll hand back over to Joanna.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rebecca, for walking us through the report and the forced labour estimates and the narratives behind that. I think we can all agree that in the report there are some pretty harrowing statistics, so it'll be super exciting later on to hear from domestic workers and hear from how they've been organising and campaigning for change. But before that, we're going to just hear briefly from the key researchers behind this report. The first of these is Jenna Holliday, the author. She unfortunately cannot be with us in person today, but she's joining us online, and we'll be hearing a video message from her shortly. And the other key researcher we must mention is Daniel and his team from Rapid Asia. Daniel, if you're in the room, can you give us a wave? Give us a wave. That's Daniel right there. So if you have any questions later on about data processes and methodology, you can approach him later on to ask. I'm sure he's more than thrilled to answer your questions. But first of all, we'll hear from the video from Jenna. That's all right. Maybe, hopefully. I think the video is being loaded. Technical difficulties.
Hi, my name is Jenna Holliday and I'm a migration specialist based in the UK. I want to start by apologising that I can't be with you today to see this report launched in person. This work is incredibly important and it was a privilege to be involved in it. Using different research methodologies, this study is able to paint a compelling picture of skills involved in domestic work and the exploitative labour conditions that many migrant domestic workers continue to experience. In addition to analysing the data and drafting the report, I was lucky to be able to undertake the qualitative piece myself, speaking with representatives of government, civil society, employers, and the migrant domestic workers. Where quantitative data can show us trends and patterns, how many, how much, and how often, qualitative research can help us to understand why and how something is occurring, providing the detail that can really make a piece of research come to life. As we found with this study, it can also influence the direction of the research itself. In Singapore, the data told us that domestic workers were employed by agents, but the qualitative data was able to explain that this was a misconception based on the close relationship that agents continue to have with workers and employers after the worker has been placed. Conversations with domestic workers in Thailand illustrated the multiple ways that women were navigating the immigration and employment systems in a way that demonstrated autonomy and agency and ultimately resulted in better working conditions. This was able to help us explain the quantitative data that was telling us that forced labour in Thailand did not correlate with irregularity. Equally, conversations with employers illustrated the different perceptions that employers and domestic workers reported on workload. A particular example being the employer who told me that her domestic worker took her dog out for a walk after finishing work. In this case, the employer did not see the dog walk as part of the domestic worker's workload. There were also emotional stories, some that did not make it into the report at length, but are worthy of reporting. Stories of women who had devoted their entire lives to domestic work, providing skilled care to multiple households, often multiple children, all the while sending money back to support their own families back home. These were often stories of loss, not being able to return home to bury parents, or to greet new grandchildren, or even to attend the graduations that they so often funded. There were stories of young women using the opportunities that migrant domestic work provides to leave conflict and as a gateway to better work in new countries, willing to accept that this meant sharing a bedroom with the 3-year-old child that they were employed to care for. And this is the real benefit of the qualitative piece, because it brings the humanity to the numbers. And it reminds us that when the numbers say that 5% or 7% or 29% of migrant domestic workers are in a situation of forced labour, which is what these findings show, what it's saying is that 5 or 7 or 29 out of every 100 migrant domestic workers, women with families, homes, aspirations and voices, are experiencing significant exploitation. I hope this study goes some way to advancing the advocacy that can improve the situation for these women. Let me finish by wishing you all the best for the launch, and I'll be online for questions should there be any. Thank you.
Round of applause for Jenna. Yeah, she's online, as she said, so she'll be able to answer your questions from online. And I just want to thank you for emphasising the human nature of these stories. As she said, no matter whether it's 5% or 29%, these are real human stories and the centre of the work that ILO does. Right, now I'd like to invite Anna and our domestic workers onto the stage, if you'd like to come up here, for a little fireside chat where we hear about their experiences in domestic work. So welcome to the stage, Anna, technical specialist with the Triangle and ASEAN program, and our domestic workers, Liesel, Yanti, and Champa. Can we give them a round of applause?
Thank you very much, Joe, Rebecca, and Kun Pin for your earlier presentations, but I'm very sorry to be giving the most interesting, the most lively, and the most wonderful portion of today's event. I am absolutely honoured to be moderating this discussion with 3 of the most impressive women you will ever see speak on domestic work. Absolutely. Between them, They have over 50 years of experience in domestic work, and each of them also plays an absolutely critical role in the domestic worker movement in their countries of employment. They are brave and have graciously agreed to be here today so that we can hear something of their stories and some of their reactions to the research that you've just seen presented. So thank you to Liesl, Yanti, and Champa for taking the time out of your schedule. Thank you to your employers for allowing you to take the time out of your schedule, and we're so grateful that you're able to be here to lead this conversation. To give a quick introduction, Liesl is a domestic worker from Cebu City who is also a leader and organizer with AMPO, a group of Filipino migrant domestic workers in Malaysia. For decades, she's been able to support her family and her parents through migrant domestic work in Kuwait and Malaysia. She's also a keen baker, and she has basic veterinarian skills, so if you do need an animal immunized, this is the woman to go to this afternoon. Yanti, in the middle there, has been working in Singapore as a domestic worker for over 12 years. She's originally from Central Java, and she volunteers with the Home organization, which is dedicated to supporting the rights of migrant workers in Singapore. Alongside this work, she's also a community organizer who has been arranging volleyball tournaments for migrant workers in Singapore, but I am reliably told she is better at the organizing than at the volleyball. And Champa is an ILO star, but has also worked as a migrant domestic worker in Thailand for 30 years. She represents a network of domestic workers from Myanmar and advocates for their rights within Thailand, including, as Rebecca mentioned, for their inclusion within the social security schemes. She's also the cover girl on today's report, so you may recognize her face from there. So, ladies, you've heard the summary of the research that we did, and for me, one of the key findings was that domestic workers, as they gain experience and they gain understanding of the environment and the country in which you work, they're able to negotiate better and better working conditions. It seems to be a pattern that the first job that domestic workers, and particularly migrant domestic workers, get is often the worst. Can you tell us a little bit about how you have experienced the length of time in domestic work and how you've negotiated or found yourself in better positions as time has gone on? Maybe we can start with you.
Okay, thank you, Anna, and good afternoon, everyone. There's a lot of story to tell, but for now, my employer is okay. She's good that she allowed me to be here, but before I also experienced like I was locked up during Sundays when the employer is outside of the country. They travel. They left me inside because they don't give me the access card. So how can I go down? Or I can go down, but how can I go up to the condominium that they live? So it's not easy for 18 years to be a domestic worker. It's not easy. The challenges that I'm facing, but that's the reality, or that bring me where I am now. Why I am organizing migrant domestic workers, for them not to experience what I experienced before. When I was in Kuwait, although my employer is okay, I was working with them for 6 years, but during the time when my father died, I was not able to go back. So that's the very sad thing in my life that I have to face. Even after the 13 years, the pain is still here because, it's your parents. I also lost my brother 2 years ago when my father died, but the pain is not the same. When you lost your parents, it's really, really sad. So that's the challenge, and that's why I am organizing migrant domestic workers to not, experience what I'm experiencing.
Thank you very much, Liesl. I'm sure I'm not the only one who's moved by that story as well, so thank you. Yanti, did you want to talk a little bit?
Hello everyone, thank you for the chance. I'm Yanti, I'm from Indonesia. Now I'm working in the Singapore is better, more the better. But the first time I also have a bad story. I work in the Singapore, the first time is 2011. The time I leave my baby, then I still not lucky to get the employer because I have abuse for 2 years, 4 months. My employer always slap my face because always jealous taking care of the small children. The time when I came to Singapore, I leave my baby. I have one baby, 8 months the time. So I never contact my family because never give me chance to call my family, and I also don't have any off day because in the contract already sent like that, so I just follow the rules. So what happening when after 18 months, I just wondering if my baby is passed away already for 18 months. This is very painful for me because I don't know. Sometimes I cannot believe my baby is passed away already. Until 18 months, I just know about that. Then I still continue with my employer because the time I really need to earn money for my family. But of course, my spirit is no more ready because my baby is gone already. Then I still want to keep fight. Then I still continue, but my employer is become more to do abuse me. Then that's why I go to home, ask to help. Then until now, I be volunteer home help desk because of that.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Yanti. Against the backdrop of a really awful, sad story, I think we see the importance of the solidarity and the organizations that can support domestic workers as well when they face troubles, which of course, as all other humans, they will do in their working life. Champa?
Yeah. For me, it was, as you said, and the experience of 30 years is not, some of you might not be born here. See, you look very young, 22. So I've been working as a domestic worker for 30 years. In 30 years, yes, I did face a lot of, I won't say it's not a physical abuse, but yes, verbal abuse. And, you know, but the thing I remember most is that when I worked first as a domestic worker, you know, I was very young, very 17 years. I wanted to go out and everything, but you know, not getting a day off and looking at other, you know, our sisters getting a day off and the beautiful dress, they're going out. Therefore, you wanted to go out, but for me, it was like one thing that it struck me. Still, I used to look at my employers if they are happy, just to get asked for their day off. If they are happy, looking at her face, if she's happy, then I will just go inside the room and ask for tomorrow, can I have a day off? I don't want anyone who's coming here to feel the way I felt at that time. You know, just for one day off, every 3 months, you feel like you have to look at the face or what the employer listening to. Are they if they are watching a sad movie, I would not go inside the house, inside the room to ask for the day off, because I knew they would say, no, I'm in a bad mood, I'm not going to let you go. So I don't want anyone to feel that the way I felt. So after 30 years, it's, for me, you know, helping other domestic workers it's good. You know, I don't want anyone to feel the way I felt at that time.
Thank you, Champa. And it's a really good point. None of us should have to beg for our basic rights at work. None of us should have to attempt to manage the emotions of our employer to ask for really what are some fundamental rights at work. But fortunately, I think you've all gotten better at asking or demanding or requiring the basic rights at work, the rights that are enshrined in the ILO's Domestic Work Convention. And now you're all involved in supporting other domestic workers in your countries. So maybe you can reflect a little bit about what your sisters come to each of your organizations for. What stories do they come with? What are the traditional patterns of when they come to HomeNet or to Home or to AMPO, please?
Actually, things has not been changed over the years. We still hear a lot of domestic workers who were locked in the house, don't have mobiles. For 6 years, they don't have access to mobile phone. Or for 18 years, they don't receive salaries that in their country of origin they were already known that they already died. After 18 years of not communicating their family, the family already said that maybe they died already because there's no communication. So things has, still the same. It's not changed. That's why we really urge the government, because my experience and other experience where all the domestic workers struggle for not having, I would not say rest days, I would say day off, because many, even from the government, like if you say rest days, you would just rest. But who will believe that the domestic workers will really rest in the house of the employer? We're not resting. Even during Sundays, the employer or even the children, even if you are in your room, they will say, hey, can you cook a food for me? Can you take care of the children? No. So that's why we're really like campaigning to have this day off, to have the domestic workers a protection. And it's not benefiting only for the domestic workers if we have day off, but also for the employers. Why? Because if we have day off, we can go out, we can join some organization, or maybe we can go to some schools that offered short skills. We can, we can refresh our mind and earning some skills. That's why it's very important, and it's very important for our mental health.
Absolutely, absolutely. I don't think anybody in this room could imagine what it is like to work 7 days a week without a break. Yanti, do you want to tell a little bit about some experiences you've had while volunteering at home?
Okay. After my case done, I decided to be volunteer home is since 2014. So I'm the one hold the hotline number. So mostly every day I have somebody as help, but mostly Singapore is like the case is mental abuse. Mental abuse, not enough food, then some more no off day because just only the MOM the rule if one off day must cannot change by compensation salary. So before is our off day is very difficult for us. Like 1 2 off day we need to cook everything, breakfast, lunch until dinner. Come back also we still need to clean house also. That is difficult. Then some of them is still employer don't give enough food. Like example for lunch, dinner they will give only instant noodle. And then morning only one bread and tea without coffee. Like that only. Then some of the off day important for us because when we go off day we can ask people to help us also, to talk to other friend, to do activity with the other friend. That's why in the Singapore I doing to make the tournament volleyball to show for all them how's important off day for us, because even we working the other country we still can do our activity, our hobby to show to other domestic worker how we keep fit to ourselves, because without keep fit to ourselves nobody can help. So the first important is we must keep fit to ourselves first. So everything if we keep fit to ourselves first, so we can easy to get it to help to other people. Because some domestic workers scared to speak up because of money. They need money, but they also scared to speak about the situation working to the employer. That's the way. So we need to show to them how we keep fit ourselves first.
Thank you very much. I think I'll have to get to a volleyball tournament soon.
Yeah, for me, domestic worker is a worker. For me, working as 30 years as a domestic worker, and there is no month I did not get paid from my employer. That means I'm working 30 years, and at the end of the month, I do have salary from the employer. So I'm a worker. So why not include ours in, why not think that domestic worker is a worker and domestic workers is a worker? And why not include us in their social security, which is, I said, well, I always said, there might be young girls who will come from another country, like from Myanmar at this moment, like 15 or 16, because of the situation of the country. But like me, there was no situation at that time, but it's been 30 years already. I'm working as a domestic worker. Let's say I did not have any, I was not included in this social security. So it's, my future is not, if I don't save money by myself, my future is not guaranteed, like I do have money, or even for the pension, like other workers. So when domestic work is the work that you have to use your physical, and when you get old, you have less chances to get job. So why not let us contribute to the social security when we can work, when we are young, when we can work, we can earn money, so we can contribute. So, but in Thailand, as we said, you are not included in the social security. So it's our life. It's not sure after 60 what it's going to be for me. So this is we are campaigning for, as you see in the pictures, social security number section 33. So I hope we will be included in the social security. At this moment, we are campaigning for that. Yeah.
Thank you. I also hope that that's the case, but I hope in addition that we will see an updated ministerial regulation 14 that has minimum wage and some regular hours and some mandated leave as well for domestic workers in Thailand.
Yeah.
The social security bill is a wonderful first step, and I hope we will see that it is just the first of many. Ladies, we're nearly finished this portion of the event, but we have, for domestic work, quite a significant audience today and quite a significant audience online and some media present. So this is your opportunity to send one message today about perhaps what you would like changed, perhaps an attitude, perhaps a story, whatever you would like to communicate, please.
Yeah, what I always saying or asking to people, are we domestic workers are not human like everyone? We are also human. Even the machines that are operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they will broke. How much more us? And what our sister said, that food is not enough. You cannot survive for eating noodles every time or eating just a piece of bread every time. We are humans. We are deserve to be treated like a human being. So we really in this event now, I hope that those government who do not protect domestic workers will take a look back on the C-189. C-189 is already 12 years. Tomorrow is the International Domestic Workers Day, and it's the 12-year celebration of the C-189, which is recognizing domestic worker as a worker. So I hope those governments, like in Malaysia, they are launching in 2021 the National Action Plan on Forced Labor. But are they looking to the domestic worker? How we are not protected? We are not included. In the report, it says that last year, March 2022, it was just changed in the Employment Act, 1955. Only the term from domestic servant to domestic employee. But we are not included for the protection. We are excluded. So I really hope that, they can, because it says that only the minister's signature to delete the first schedule for us domestic worker to be included in the Employment Act. So I'm really hoping.
I'm hoping alongside you. And that's a very clear message for some significant legal changes to take place. Yanti?
For me, domestic worker is also human, employer also human. We drink water, employer also drink water. So still a lot employer is discrimination about us. Sometimes we cannot play in the swimming pool because we are helper. We cannot sit in the sofa because we are domestic worker. If we are dirty, why the employer need us? So for me, please stop discrimination for us.
For me, same as the other sister, because we are domestic workers and we feel one another. You know, we have the same problem everywhere in the world. I think for the domestic workers, it's not just Thailand or just not Philippines or Malaysia or Indonesia. It's everywhere. It's the same. Yeah, I just want to say that we are human, as Lizelle said. We are human, and it's. Working as a domestic workers, everyone thinks it's a low skill and everything. But for me, I don't think we are low skill. You know, we have to. I don't know who else is here with me, but just not a domestic worker. Sometimes you have to be a counselor for the even the family of even the husband and wife of the employer. You know, yes, I did that. You know, I see the family. Not just I was working as a nanny. But when they have a problem with each other, I'm in the middle, making them good. So that is not skill. And what will you say when you are out and you said when you go to the restaurant, you paid for very good food and you say, that's bad. But we at home, 50 people I manage by myself. So that is not skill, right? Yeah. So for me, it's a work that nobody sees from outside, but we know in ourselves we are workers. So that's why it should be, you know, domestic workers have to be protected by any other workers. We are workers, and we are workers with a heart. We work from our heart. So that's my message. I clap for myself. I will clap for you too.
I want to add on one more as a skill of a domestic worker. We tutor the children of the employers. How come we are not teachers? Yeah. They say we are only domestic workers, but why you're asking us work 7 hours? 7 days a week, 24 hours a day when we are not important.
During the COVID time, we are the best teachers ever. Because we are at home with the kids and we are the bringing everything, how to make that child, 2 or 3 child, sit in front of that Zoom class. So that, Lizelle, let's say, tomorrow is the International Domestic Workers Day. Let's be together, let's unite. Unite, it's the word, we have domestic workers. We are together. Yeah.
I mean, I can't top any of that, so it's pointless to even try. But there are a couple of things I do want to point out just before we close. First of all, this skills point. Absolutely. I think we have 8 or 9 languages at this table alone, and I am only contributing 1. So we have language, communication skills, counselling skills, food safety, childcare, elder care, emotional management, pet care, animal vaccination, all kinds of different skills that make up the diversity that is domestic work. And yet we see governments that rely on domestic workers across ASEAN, from the origin countries who receive the remittances from women like these to the destination countries like Thailand that rely on domestic workers to deliver a huge proportion of their care work. We see that reliance, and yet we see very little in terms of the respect, protection, and empowerment of these migrant domestic workers that they really, truly deserve. And finally, to Yanti's point, which I think is maybe at the crux of all of this, there is a humanity in this discussion around domestic workers. The needs are human, And the deliverers of those needs are human, and they frankly deserve more respect from the governments across this region and indeed across the world. So this is your wake-up call for tomorrow, the 12th anniversary of Convention 189 for decent work on domestic workers. Please respect these women by doing what you can tomorrow in your homes, on your social media, in your jobs, wherever it may be, and thank you, and join me in thanking these fabulous women for their advocacy.
Thank you again, all, for the domestic workers, Liesl, Yantu, and Champa, for sharing your experiences and your story. And thank you, first and foremost, for your passion on this issue. I think I speak for us all when we say that we've all been very moved and super inspired by you guys. We are now opening up the floor for questions and answers to our participants. We are taking them from online as well as in the room. So if you've got a question for Rebecca or Anna on the report, or for our domestic workers on their experiences, you're welcome to stand up just behind where the microphone is and ask that question. And please direct it to a person so we know who wants to answer. But yes, the gentleman at the microphone there.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. My name is Imtiaz Muqbil. I'm the executive editor of Travel Impact Newswire based in Bangkok. I actually cover the travel and tourism industry. I have two questions, but just first one, a technical question. I just want to make sure this is only domestic workers. The survey covers only domestic workers, people working in homes, right? Not people working in factories, services, etc., etc. Is there another research that looks at the conditions of migrant workers in those areas as well? If there is, I'd like to access it, but that brings me to the second question. A number of references have been made to the employers. These are high net worth individuals, people who make millions. Is there anywhere any research available about for the 1,200 workers who were interviewed? Who are the employers of these people in terms of either nationalities or places of work? Many of them, I assume, would be expatriates, and roughly some of their income levels, as many of the sisters have pointed out. These are people who treat them like pretty badly for what I can see, but I'd like to get some profile of the people who actually employ them, because it would be very useful to know the depravity and the mental level of these people who make millions and probably own yachts and Jaguars and yet treat their people like this. I mean, it's incomprehensible. So instead of just putting the governments on the block and saying you're not affording legal protection, etc., etc., it might be useful to put some research out there that challenges the employers, because it's something they can do pretty much voluntarily, but there doesn't seem to be much information available on that. So I'd like to get some details on who are the employers of these people and why is it necessary for them to treat them so badly when they're making millions?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start with that one. Well, who are the employers? It's everyone. I'm an employer, and I'm very sad to say I own neither a Jaguar nor a yacht, but like many in this room, I do work with several domestic workers in my house, and I hope one of them, in fact, is watching. Hi, Sunita. We don't have good data on the employers. We know that they exist at all of the different stratifications of of income brackets. In fact, one of the things that we hear quite regularly when we talk about minimum wage for domestic workers is that people then couldn't afford domestic workers, which indicates that there is a significant proportion of people who are on minimum wage who are also using the fact that there is no minimum wage protection for domestic workers to get very, very cheap household help. So this idea that it is only the very rich employing domestic workers certainly is not true of this region. I agree with you that we absolutely need more information about the employers, about how they justify certain kinds of behaviours, about how they set hours, how they set wages, how they set expectations. And I know that's something that we would like to do, and I'm sure Daniel and the team at Rapid Asia would also like to do. We are always at the mercy of additional funding for these kinds of studies, but it's a super interesting area to explore further and to also get that qualitative idea of why people treat domestic workers the way they do. You are very fortunate to be actually in the room with authors of other studies on migrant workers in the fishing sector. I'm looking at you, Ben. And in the agricultural sector, I'm looking at you, Anna. So there are plenty of other studies out there on forced labour as experienced by different sections of the migrant worker population here in Thailand and across ASEAN. And indeed, many of the issues are shared. Certainly the struggles with the immigration system are shared. Certainly the struggles getting assistance from the authorities or making claims for minimum wage are shared with domestic workers. I hope that goes some way to answering your question.
I want to answer, it will be answer or it will be question, I don't know. It's sometimes I do also think like you. We work in the house, like, I don't want to say the employer or any building anyway, but they have this, where we work is like the chandelier is the big, I don't know how much it costs, but the living area of the housekeeper in that, domestic worker in that house, it's the toilet, inside is like, for me it will be a 10 room. But for the quarter, the domestic worker has to leave. The toilet is like a 1920, the toilet the same, you have to sit like this. So sometimes I do also think that when they make the building, I'm not sure, I'm not expert in that. I'm expert in my work, my domestic work, but not in that kind of, but I do also think that how did they make, when they have this big room, big toilet with a 2-seat, 3, sometimes I've never seen that 2-seat or, there is a 2 basin in one toilet. But for the quarter for domestic workers to live, it's like a small one with, if I get bigger than this, I wouldn't fit in that. So I also think that when they make that kind of building, 30-story building, how do they think that which domestic workers, they make that room for the domestic workers, they know, but there's no, the air will go out, anything. That's why I think also, I don't know how do you call that, the air thing, no windows, it's all closed. So I also think, how do they think when they build a building, they have this chandelier for how many millions, but for the toilet or the room area for domestic workers, it's like that. So I also want to know, how do they think when they build the building?
Yeah, it's right, sister, that those architects who build these condominiums, because even in Malaysia there are a lot of big houses, a lot of big condominiums, but the room for domestic worker, it's near in the kitchen. So near in the kitchen meaning that we're very good cook. Yeah. But then why do we put us in the very small room without proper ventilation? So, like maybe not all that the toilet is like that, but the thing is that the room is very small, and then there's no proper ventilation. And also I wish that there's a survey for the employers why they treated their domestic workers like this and like that. I really wish there is, but I don't think those bad employers, I'm not saying that all employers are bad, because we experience also a good employer, an employer of my friend who is supporting us fresh fruits and vegetables during pandemic. The whole pandemic time, she ordered food to deliver on our door. But those bad employers, are they willing to answer the survey? That's the question. Thank you.
I think same also, some in Singapore also have condominium. If the room is very small, the bathroom is also very small for us. Even we want to shower, we cannot move by street like this, so shower cannot move here because very small, maybe 50 to 1 meter. Then the room also very small. Then even Wi-Fi also cannot connect. Even data, we use data also cannot connect. So very inspiring, so hot because only use the fan, there no window. This is next time we finish work, we want to talk to the family, but the connection is very difficult. Even Wi-Fi also cannot connect. Even we use data also, the signal is very difficult because mostly they put us in the storeroom, but make the room for us, like that one.
But yeah, these three sisters are staying here and just talking bad about their employers. I have met a lot of, in my life I said in the interview, like 8 to 10 employers. There was only one employer I felt like I was not safe in that house. But other than that, all the employer I worked for are very nice, very sweet, very good family, you know, and they treated like us as a family. And one of the reason I'm here today helping other sisters is because of my employer also, because there was French family I worked for 6.5 years, and that family made me feel like I'm worth it to work others, to help others. And then they always encourage me, Champa, whatever you are doing is good, because it's not only for you, it's for all the domestic workers from your country as well as in Thailand. So when my employer, you know, they speak to me like that, it gives you very big energy inside yourself that to be what I am today, to helping others, and then for me, for me also. So it's there is a lot of very, very, very nice employers. So please don't feel when you have domestic workers at home that we are just talking bad about the employers. There is very nice and very good employers. We wish all the employers could be like that. So everyone will be happy, me and as well as the employer. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for your answers. They were brilliant. All right, we've got time for one more question. So.
Yeah, I have actually you're going to have 3 more questions. I'm
Three
afraid.
more questions, never
let's
mind.
keep it brief. These have come in online and via email. The first is, there's a mention of involuntariness and penalties which make up forced labour. Can you give some examples of the penalties? What exactly does that entail in practical terms? Another question is on MOUs between Malaysia and Cambodia. MOUs signed to govern sort of migration pathways, corridors between countries. How important is it that things like minimum wages, training, language skills are included in those MOUs? And do you expect any similar agreements? And this is specifically with regard to Cambodian migrant workers. And very briefly, the third question relates to the recommendations in the report talk about the need for skills to be recognised, better migration pathways. These are not new things, they've been around for decades. Why doesn't anything ever change? Is it simply a case of a lack of political will? Anna, I pass those to you.
I'm going to pass the first one straight over to Rebecca to give a couple of examples of the things that we consider to be threat of a menace of penalty within the definition of forced labour.
That question was on involuntariness, right, Steve?
Oh, sorry.
Was it? Yeah, okay. No, but there was also a clarification of what penalty is as well. Okay, so I'll look at both. So the International Conference of Labor Statisticians has set out criteria that we followed very strictly in our questionnaire. And with regards to involuntary work, some of the things were working for no or very little wages, not being allowed to quit a job, not being paid overtime, very poor accommodation, having to work on-call hours without your consent, having to stay in a job longer than agreed. There's a few more in there, detailed in the report as well. There's a couple charts there. The second set of questions relates to penalties or threats. So these can include threats of violence or actual violence, restrictions on movement, so being locked in a house or in a room, withholding wages, withholding identity documents or telephones, your mobile phone, constant surveillance, which is often a CCTV, sometimes even in a person's private space, and threats of dismissal or deportation. Those are some of the most common ones that people answered positively to. In terms of what is a penalty, the penalty is a kind of short phrase that we're using to talk about threat of a menace of penalty. So it's very complicated within the ILO stats world, but these indicators have been agreed by a group of tripartite actors. So government, employers, and workers came together to agree this set of indicators. And again, there's several charts in the report, so please do look and you'll see the percentages of responses for each.
Okay, I'll thank you very much, Rebecca. I'll have a go at the question around the MOUs for Malaysia and Cambodia. The figure of 57% of the Cambodian population that we surveyed in Malaysia being in forced labour was absolutely shocking in terms of it being so high. It was unfortunately not terribly shocking in terms of it being the Cambodian population that was most at risk of forced labour. Over several years, the Memorandum of Understanding between Cambodia and Malaysia has had a bit of a stop-start process, which has meant that a lot of the Cambodian migrant workers in Malaysia have fallen into irregular situations. And irregular situations can increase your risk or your likelihood of taking on jobs that perhaps are not good and staying in jobs that are not good, because the migration regimes are such that if you are found, you will be deported. The new MOU for Malaysia and Cambodia, I believe, is actually considered to be a state secret in Malaysia, so I'm not sure quite how the question writer saw this. However, it does not have a minimum wage included in it. MOUs, unfortunately, are not enforceable, so while we have seen some good outcomes for MOUs, including a minimum wage, particularly in Singapore, we've seen some improvements in salaries for domestic workers where minimum wages are included in Memoranda of Understanding. There are a couple of reasons why that isn't the way the ILO would like to go. First and foremost, of course, that a minimum wage should cover all domestic workers, migrant or national, in any country context. Secondly, of course, minimum wages that are set by country of origin can be different, and it can cause this kind of race to the bottom. If one country sets the wage at 200, then perhaps another country will set it at 100 so that they can gain access to this destination market for their migrant domestic workers. So while setting a minimum wage in an MOU might be a good kind of stopgap or initial manoeuvre, it certainly isn't an end point for improving conditions for migrant domestic workers. As for the skills being recognised and more regular migration pathways being opened up, yes, we are still looking for major change in those areas. I think the most important one for the migrant domestic workers themselves is to see those skills recognised not necessarily in improved migration channels, though that would be wonderful, but to see the skills recognition in increased pay and better conditions. We're yet to prove or to see where skills actually make a difference to employers. Unfortunately, still employers are seeking certain kinds of characteristics. Maybe it's a nationality, maybe they want somebody who's unmarried, maybe they want somebody of a particular religion, rather than, as in all of our other jobs, looking for somebody who can actually do the work that they need done in the homes.
Hopefully that answers the questions of the people online. One more question from Ben. Sneak it in. All right, go fast.
Thank you. Yeah, congratulations to the Triangle team. I think it's a brilliant study and really adds to the knowledge base on this issue. So congratulations. I just wanted to push the envelope a little bit. I think it's a brilliant insight that yes, domestic workers are not low skilled; they are medium skilled within this framework that exists. But I also wonder if it does not imply a more sort of fundamental question about this hierarchy of skills that's been established. I mean, I think fundamentally domestic work is the key type of work that challenges that model. Domestic workers have so many skills which are very difficult to quantify that allow them to do their jobs properly. And does that not imply that maybe this hierarchical system of skills that we have is more fundamentally flawed? And in particular, is that ever going to be conducive to facilitating social justice? I mean, if you value someone's skills over someone else's, can you actually have social justice in that context? Thanks.
Maybe some of the sisters want to talk about this.
I was going to start us off. Ben, yeah, agreed. Thank you. And I think we all probably hoped that the focus on domestic work and care over the course of the COVID-19 pandemic would kind of start to invert this skills pyramid that we have by recognizing how essential care work and work within the home actually is. I don't know if we're, hopefully, with this report, in part, starting to push that over the ledge, where we do consider these kinds of essential work skilled, or we even just remove this idea of being skilled versus unskilled and consider what is essential in maintaining all of our lives and our livelihoods and our humanity. Did you want to speak as well?
Yeah.
We're going to give the last word to Champa. What a surprise.
So I think when we speak about skills, I don't know if the skills is in the paper or you learned from the school, or I don't know what skills means or anything. But for me, my skills come from my work. My skills come from my work looking after, let's say, when I was 17, I didn't know how to take care of the baby. So, but by the time when I worked for one family and moved for another family in 20, by the age of 20, I was expert in looking after the toddler. So, I don't know. The skills, when you say skills, comes from where? Are you measure by paper or certificates or something like that? For me, skills come from the experience of work.
And that's, I think, absolutely the challenge that we're looking at as well when we're talking about skills recognitions and skilled migration pathways. How do we recognize the breadth and depth of experience that domestic workers have when they may not have a piece of paper to wave around, but clearly have, at least at this table, over 50 years worth of experience, skilled and understanding in their jobs. So I think that concludes our section.
Good timing, great timing. So please everybody put your hands together for Anna and our sisters. Thank you for your insightful comments. Thank you for your passion. Thank you for being willing to give up your time to talk to us about this. We really appreciate it. You are truly some really inspiring women. Before I let you go, I have to say thank yous. Obviously, I'll get through them really fast, I promise. Firstly, thank you to the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand for hosting us. It's a great place, so do sign up if you're not a member yet. Thank you again to the donors of the Triangle and ASEAN projects. That's the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade and Global Affairs Canada for supporting this really important work and supporting our domestic workers and the research in this area. Thank you to Stephen Jirapur and the communications team for helping out with the press release and the social media here. Thank you to our tech team for handling the online hybrid thing and for pushing next on the slides. Thank you to the researchers of this report, Daniel and Jenna. Couldn't have been done without you. You literally made this event happen because there's no event without a report. Thank you to the Triangle team, to Anna O, to Anna E, to Rebecca, to Alexis. Again, no report without you guys. You guys are truly superstars. Thank you to the audience, both in person and online, for showing your support, for showing that we care about the rights of domestic workers. Again, no campaign and no organising happens without you guys showing up and showing that this is an issue we really care about. And lastly, but most importantly, thank you to Liesl, Yanti and Champa for your passion, for your words, just being amazing people all around. Yes, can we get a round of applause for everybody? And that concludes this event. Please take home the report, read it, tell your friends about it. Please take the reports at table over there that also talk about care work. And there's also refreshments for people who want to stay and chat. Thank you for coming. Yeah, get a photo.
Great, thank you so much.
No, it's all right. Get a photo. Get a photo, yes. Don't move yet.
You look great.